Hi there. Welcome to yet another episode of M&A Stories by Fifth Chrome Business Insights. My name is Anirvan Sen. I'm your host today.
My name is Marcella Hall. I'm your co-host today.
And today's topic is a very interesting one. We bring in somebody who's got tons of experience with joint ventures. As you know, joint ventures and M&A have a lot of similarities and yet few very distinct differences. And that's why in our M&A stories, we decided to bring upon an expert on JV who can compare and contrast the differences and the similarities between the two. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ivan Golubic all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. Ivan, it's great to have you at our show today. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Excellent. And I know you're based in Phoenix, Arizona, right? So how's the weather there?
You know, I think today is the first day of the fall, which we're so excited about. So we are officially, I think, out of triple digits. So really looking forward to the next 6 months.
Awesome. I mean, we have the same. We had our autumn start yesterday and we had wind howling, which is a very typical scenario of Netherlands at this part of the year. So, but today is great. It's sun is shining outside. It's brilliant. Now, I see a lot of license plates on your wall I'm sorry for the listeners, but for the viewers, they can definitely see those license plates. So what's the story there?
Well, it's a story that I really liked cars when I was a kid. So I started collecting the plates along the way, wherever I moved, wherever I had a car. I collected once. Most of them were mine. Some of them were donated. Otherwise, other ones acquired. So, but yeah, there's also a stack of plates that didn't make it to the wall yet, and hopefully soon will. But one of the most prized possessions I had was a license plate from a UN peacekeeping troops. So that's not a very easy one to obtain.
Cool. Maybe later you can share with us how you obtained that. I'd love to hear the story behind that.
It was a gift from a cousin, but I think I'll just leave it at
that. Okay, sounds good. Well, we know that you have lived and worked in a variety of different places. Curious to know a little bit more about your background and how did you land in a career focused on transactions?
Yeah, definitely from probably from where I live to how I speak and what my name is. It's definitely diversity comes through without being able to hide it. But I was born and raised in Croatia, and I came to the U.S. when I was in high school in the early 90s. And when people ask me, you know, what is it that drove you to M&A or to transactions? I always tell them a story. When I first came to the U.S., I was 15. I got a room living on my own, and a week went by, and 2 weeks went by, and a load of laundry started piling up in my corner. And very quickly, I realized if I don't do it, nobody will get it done. So I buckled up and started doing things. Fast forward 20, 30 years later, I incorporated the same principle into the transactions and M&A. And the reason why is every transaction is slightly different. Every transaction needs a different attention. And if you're part of the core team, it is really that initiative of just getting things done that makes you successful in it. And that's where I thought I fit quite well. And, you know, I went between finance and transactions quite a lot throughout my career. Even now, I'm kind of back and forth a little bit, but at the same time, the transaction side it's just very exciting, and you can see very tangible results very quickly.
Now, you spent a lot of time conducting JVs as well, right? Mm-hmm. And for our viewers, let's hear a bit of a compare and contrast between a JV and an M&A.
Yeah. So exactly, I was lucky enough to work on a few JVs, and I would say there are two things that are, you know, a contrast and the similarities. The concept of the transaction is very similar. So you go through the same assessment, due diligence, what do you need to do, how you need to do it. And even the integration part, to some degree, the planning of it can be relatively similar in the process. The biggest difference in JVs that I have observed, JVs are very relationship-based transactions. It is not one and done type of a transaction. It's a relationship that two independent parties are forming for a common purpose or a common goal. And it goes over many years, both planning of it, running it, and sometimes dissolving it as well. So that is the biggest difference that I would say, is that relationship between the two independent parties that come together with common goal, versus a transaction is, you work on a transaction, you close it, you have some TSA, and you transition out. You don't transition out of the JV. Hopefully not.
Yeah, that's a great call out. We have talked a lot about how some, transactions or acquisitions in particular don't necessarily achieve the value that they set out to achieve. I'm curious to know if you think, what sort of challenges do you see? Why do you think this is? And also if you have a perspective on JVs compared to acquisitions.
Yeah, I think so. JVs are even more susceptible of not achieving its results. And as we know, I think most of the JVs, I think, fail after 6 years. Those are things that are very present in everybody's mind as they enter the JV. So maybe just amplify the same problems that you are having with the transactions. But there's two things that I always point out to in a transactions of why they mainly fail. One is not understanding or not aligning on the purpose of the transactions. What are you trying to achieve? And the second part is execution/integration of it, either poor or ineffective way of doing it. And I want to talk about the previous one, because that one is usually, everybody understands the complexity of the integrations, and it needs to get done right. Where people really fail is understanding the importance of the purpose, why. And my anecdote that I usually use is, it's like buying a house from your neighbor, okay? You have your own house and your neighbor's house goes on sale. It might be a really great deal, but if you don't have a purpose for it, what are you going to do with it? You're going to spend the money on it. It's going to sit there. You're going to have to invest money into it and put money to maintain it. If you don't need it for extra space, or if you're not going to flip it, it's really useless. It just ties up the cash and invest. Same thing happens with JVs or acquisitions. You acquire a company. If it doesn't really fit into your portfolio, into your strategy, you just end up putting a lot of money in it and being a big distraction for the management. And that's one thing on that, really understanding what is the purpose of going into that transaction, and then measuring that success. We might talk about that a little bit later, of the progress of how you're doing it. The integration side is, the only thing I would say before we're going into it too much is, there is a right time to incorporate or to start integration planning process. And I usually don't propose that you start too early, but you shouldn't start too late. My opinion is you should really start it at the due diligence. I always like to say that, to ask an integration lead to be a core member of due diligence process, because at that point, she can start thinking about, oh, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, how am I going to integrate that into the final organization? And that's, I think, that would be my recommendation for successful integrations.
That's a brilliant call out on the comparison between the JVs and integration, especially the call out on starting at the due diligence stage. Absolutely brilliant, and completely agree with you on that one. Now, let's look at some of the challenges. And before we get into several kinds of challenges, one of the things that we see when we compare JVs versus acquisitions is, in acquisitions, or people or companies go for acquisition because they want to have a complete control of the scenario. Whereas JV, because two parties are involved, each one of them wants to yield their own control over the JV, and that kind of sometimes create conflicts. At the same time, without the control, things don't move at all. You may have JV. So what's been your experience with respect to control, and what are some of the challenges that companies should overcome while looking at a JV?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, and one thing that everybody struggles a lot with. My thing that the most important part of JVs are the governance structure of the JV, and the governance structure really starts with the objective. what are the objectives of JVs? I always liked when I would go either create one or advise later of how to do a JV, pick 3 or 4 objectives, KPIs that you are going to monitor it, and understand that both parents or multiple parents need to be focused in maximizing those KPIs and not worried about a lot of other things. So put into place the structure and governance that supports that, whether that generate cash, whether that's increasing market share, whether that is reducing cost, whatever those very particular items are, measure yourselves against that and discount. Try to avoid everything, all other distractions, because that's where it's going to come and get you later on. That relationship can become really tense if you start focusing on other things. The other side about it is invest time early in governance. I know people don't like doing it. People don't like thinking about it when they're planning on it. It's worth spending. It's worth actually. This is where I would recommend getting a third-party consultant who is an independent party on structuring that governance, seeing the issues in the relationship, seeing the potential things that can arise in a conflict. Environment changes. The JV that we joined today, I mean, think about if you create a JV in 2019. COVID hits, everything changes. How do you resolve the conflicts between the 2 parents or different goals of each parent? That is really done through proper governance. And governance needs to be straightforward. It needs to be understandable what the roles are, but it also needs to be flexible enough to really understand those changing conditions for each parent. You can't really be too rigid in how governance works. It has to be very rule-based, but it has to allow for flexibility of the JV to adjust.
Awesome. And doing a bit more analytics on that one, doing a bit more deep dive on that one. When it comes to JVs, right? So you have different forms of JVs. Like, so let's take an example where one of the JVs could be the entity. It's a new entity where each of the partners have a certain percentage of shares of the company, new company they formed, versus it's a logical JV, but physically they still operate from their own individual entities. This could be more like a strategic alliance rather than a JV, right? What's been your experience, or what sort of conditions need to be met for setting up a new, fresh entity versus doing with an existing entity in terms of more a loose affiliation or an alliance rather than a full-fledged JV?
Yeah. So I've actually, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to see it, has experience with both set of structures. I would say in either way, when you're forming a brand new JV, you really need to make sure that you create a JV specific culture within that organization that is not one parent or another parent blended, that is unique to the JV. There's a number of things that you can do to create that, but that tone from the management really needs to be, we are a separate company. We're not extension of company A or company B. We are a new company C that we formed. We have governance from the parents, but operationally we are a brand new company. So that's really what I would recommend and really emphasize on. When you are forming a JV that is more of a strategic partnership, or you're kind of combining the operations in one, or it's more of a legacy thing, is that's where you got to be really careful that you give both sides equal opportunity and equal, I would say, importance. And that's where you do it through the governance and through the KPIs and through regular reviews, regular sharing, but really also monitoring those key objectives of how you do it. You may not be able to create a completely new culture, but you also need to make sure that throughout that organization, it is very clearly known that you are working for a JV. One of the biggest failures that I have seen in a JV is that when the JVs were formed, but they were still treated, especially if it's a majority ownership of one parent, they were still treated as a core company, and it could just part of it with a minority equity sharing. That's not what JV is, and ultimately, unfortunately, it failed. But that was one of the things that it was never treated as a JV operation. It was treated as just almost a co-investment from the other side. So the strategic objectives of the other party were just not being met.
I love that you underscored the importance of governance. And then, in terms of as time goes on, right, the JV that you're in today is not going to be the same JV tomorrow. And then I also love that you talked about creating a JV specific culture, and that, it's not an extension of either of the parent companies. I'm curious to know, as you look back and reflect on all of the deals that you've been involved in, which I know that's been quite a number of different deals. What sort of lessons have you learned? Where have you seen things where maybe something unexpected happened or something surprising happened that wasn't anticipated? Curious, as you reflect back, what sort of lessons you've learned.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of examples, and the every deal that you go, whether it's JV or M&A, I will always say it always dies twice before it happens. So you have to be ready. It's not a business for people who like to be predictable. Let's just put it that way. You have to be really flexible on it. I'll give you a few anecdotes of surprises that you have to deal with throughout the transactions. And one that pops, first of all, is a COVID one that is I worked on an international transaction for about a year and a half. We had everything printed out, paper printed out that Friday morning to sign when world went on the lockdown, and we never got it done. It got done in a different way, but those are things that you can't control. It just throws you, and you have to adjust, and you have to fix it. So definitely an unexpected. But besides that, the other interesting unexpected part is we were in meeting in London one day, and we flew from the US, and the other party was flying as well in. And the party shows up without a key negotiator or key person, and we asked what happened, and it happened that the individual was, as they were leaving the country, he was detained at the airport by the authorities and never made it to the meeting. Well, let's just put it that way: the leverage shifted in our direction quite heavily that morning. But those are things that you just have to live with. It's just part of it. As it comes to running and actually more of a transactional things, there is a number of things that will go different. Another example was we were forming a JV in the US. It was a domestic JV with two industry players, and it happens that those same players had a pretty significant share in China and Turkey. And we realized that we have to file for antitrust approvals in those countries, even though the JV was never going to leave really the proper US proper. So those are just kind of transactional things that happen, and you just have to be ready for, and always really kind of give yourself a little bit of a buffer on the timeline, because I've never been on a transaction that something hasn't gone a little bit offside.
Yeah, that's great advice. And great examples. Thank you for sharing those.
And that's a nice segue to my next question as well, right? So a lot of times industry experts say JV is not about what's written in the contract, but what's not written in the contract. Yeah. So, let's hear your experience on that one.
Yeah, so JVs is, and this is why I actually like them, is I'm already mentioned, it's a very relationship-based transaction. So what you got to remember in a JV, and I was going to mention that it's not about winning a battle; it's about winning a war, and which means that you don't need to really win against somebody, but you need to get out of it what you need to get out of that particular transaction. So as you get into the JV relationship, you got to remember it's a long-term relationship. There's going to be many gives and takes. My approach always to the JV management, that unwritten part about it, I'm going to be accommodating as much as I can be, as long as it doesn't hurt me and my organization. So if it's no skin off my back, why not to be nice and do it? And I had many and many examples, more examples than the people that I work really understand and know, is that I don't ask for unreasonable things. I don't ask things just to win. But when I really need something, I more than once I went and called the opposite side. Is like, hey, I know this may seem unreasonable to you, but I really need it. And you build credibility, and it's never been denied in my case, because they say, we know you don't ask us if it's not reasonable, so it's no skin off our back. Here you go, you can have it. We'll do you that favor. But there is an understanding that you will do a favor back again if it's not. Also, I will say most parties, 90% of the parties that I work, have always been very reasonable. If they understand that it's hurting your organization and who you represent, they know that you can't just give into it, that there is gives and takes. So I would say most people are pretty reasonable about it. I haven't really had a case where that has been a major issue. Few cases, but not in majority. And I think that's one thing that, as you formed JVs and govern them, is that unwritten rule of respect, understanding, and kind of allowing other party to succeed as long as it's not at your cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that approach. That makes so much sense. And it sort of, to your point, continues to build the trust and build the relationship that is so important over the, whatever the term of the JV may be. I'm curious to know, have you ever seen the relationship, between the two parent companies go sour? Has it ever ended pretty badly, or have you seen where, the parties have been able to continue to salvage the relationship?
Oh yeah, I've seen it sour, really bad. Court cases and mediations and anything and everything you can think of. It's an interesting point that you bring up, and sometimes you have to get it to the point of, no, we are really serious. This is really important for us. But it's really important at that point not to take things personally or not to become personal. If you're dealing with the business issues and raising them, whether it's even in mediation or court cases, most of the times other side understands what you're trying to protect and represent, and everybody's trying to protect and represent itself. But what we had to do when the relationship became that sour and that toxic, we had to switch the team that governs that governed that relationship. And actually, that's when I got called back in to get involved, because it was one of those approaches that I had was that relationship-based approach and trust-building approach. And I wasn't the only one. There was a number of other people that were involved in it as well. But then we took that more of okay, we know that there are differences. We're not going to resolve those differences because they just fundamentally are. But how can we create a path forward that makes sense for both sides? Mm-hmm. So what we actually did is we went and dissolved the multi-decade JV. We went through the dissolution of JV, but created a number of strategic partnership agreements with the same party that now, I think 8 years later, it's still ongoing and they're still active. Even though sometimes we with it, 3 years initially, it just made sense, because what happened was the original of the idea of the JV was actually a good idea. The execution of it failed. So if you adjust that execution, restart, you can still capture the benefit of it. So even I said, there is value to capture even after the dissolution, because the value was there to begin with, and you just need to focus on what that value is, find the agreements or work out the agreements that work for both sides, and then create structure around to support those agreements.
You mentioned about relationship and trust. Are there other factors that are likely to make a JV successful versus not? And my next question related to that would be, are there industries or sectors or conditions? Say, for example, you are a brick and mortar company and you buy a digital company to complement what you have got to offer, versus buying doing a JV with a competition or part competition to provide a new kind of solution. So are there some patterns or some areas that are more likely to succeed than others?
I've heard a lot of, I would say, anecdotes of it. I haven't really seen a hardcore data on it. But yes, you're right. I mean, the relationship and trust is only one small component of the success. It's a required, maybe it's a foundation of it, but without other things, the JVs just don't make sense. And that's kind of what I was thinking. It needs to make sense. You need to understand very clearly. Both sides need to understand very clearly what are your objectives of that relationship, and whether they're being a JV or acquisition or a merger. What are the objectives of that transaction? And check yourself against those objectives. They need to be really making sense. This strategy portion for your organization down the line. What is it? So if you're entering a new market, you need to understand, I'm forming a JV to enter a new market. I'm not forming a JV to cooperate on the product. I'm not forming a JV to cut costs. I'm forming a JV to gain distribution in a market that I don't have it. If that's the focus of it, then that's what makes it successful. The problem becomes if you're starting to look at cost savings out of the distribution, out of the new market entry JV. Well, they just might not be there. Yeah, there could be a cheaper way of doing it had you built it yourself, but it would have taken you 20 years versus about 1 year. But that's very, very challenging to govern and to keep on focus once the JV once you are inside of it and it's operational. Because a lot of times what I realized is individual group of people that forms a JV has a very clear objectives and understand why they are doing it, but they don't stay around forever. After a few years, the management team changes, the players change, and the new people don't forget the original purpose of that relationship, that transaction. And that's where you really need to be careful as you're transitioning people in and out, whether it's a JV or an acquisition or management, that they really understand why it was formed and how it was formed, and what was the real purpose of the transaction and the partnership.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Thank you for underscoring that. Switching gears a little bit, since you have so much transaction experience, curious to know, and you can respond with respect to transactions or in general, are there any books that you've read in this space that you found super helpful, or you can broaden that as well? Any books that you've read in the last couple of years that you found to be really, really helpful or really influence the way you think about things and approach this work?
Oh, you put me on the spot. Yeah, I've done a few of them. There's one definitely a good one, Agile M&A by Kisan Patel, and nice. That's a good one. There's a strategic M&A. I'm gonna take a look at it right here. Oh, Mergers and Acquisition Playbook. That was a very good one as well. That I really appreciated and use a lot.
Who's the author?
Sorry?
Who's the author, Ivan?
The author, sorry, I'm going to pull back
because we're going to share the link on the
Mark Philippou.
Yeah.
If I'm not butchering that one. So, yeah. But that was a good one, and then this is actually my favorite one, I will have to say, and this is the book that I got from when my very first corporate development job, that I was full-time in corp dev, and I'm like, okay, I need to really know everything I want to know about this. So I picked up a book. It's Mergers and Acquisitions from A to Z, and by Sherman and Hart. And that one was really, really very helpful on kind of putting the whole scope of it. Those three books are probably the ones that I would recommend. There's another book that's very specific on the JV, and I don't think I have it right now that I can think of about it, but I can actually share with you guys later. That very specifically focuses from a JV. It was a professor actually out of the UK, and I will have to remember send you the contacts. But it was very good specifically on the JVs. Very transactional based, but very, very good book for anybody that needs some help.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We will share the descriptions and the links in the description box, so that our listeners and viewers can benefit from that.
Yes. And Ivan, you've lived and worked in so many places. I'm curious to know, any highlights to share, or what were some of the favorite places where you've worked?
Well, yeah, I definitely had experienced a lot of places. I will say, spent quite a bit of time doing a lot of transactions in Brazil. It would hard to say that that's not my favorite. I really enjoyed Japan as well, and they're for very different reasons. And culturally, as you travel through and work through the countries, you pick up those business as well as personal cultures of people that are there. One thing that very surprised me very much about working in Brazil, the level of professionalism and dedication, which they're not necessarily known for culturally. But on the business side, it was the very high, extreme talents that I found working with people there, and dedication, probably hard working than I have seen anywhere else. And being that part of the core team was really very, very pleasant. And it was included from both sides. But interestingly enough, in that culture, when you are negotiating, whether you are from one side or another side, you always get together afterwards and have dinners or have things. You're not treated as a separate camps at the end of the day. Looking at in Japan, very, very structured culture, very structured, very determined and very structured, I would say, negotiation process. Also extremely hospitable and very, very pleasant too. Always like going back there. So those are probably two places that really stand out, and always like doing business at.
Awesome. And Anirvan, a fun fact, I don't know, we haven't shared yet, but Ivan and I incidentally were both working in Brazil at the same time back in 2011. He was in Sao Paulo on a longer term project, and I was in Rio on a 2-month project. So that was just something that we discovered.
That actually is very interesting, because I was also working on a project in Brazil, and I was at Sao Paulo in 2011 as well.
Well, you never know.
Nice.
Maybe we were in the same restaurant. It was,
Yeah.
well, but that was the height of the economic boom in Brazil. So there was a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
Right.
What a
This
small
is
world.
awesome. Yeah.
What a small world. Yeah. And to your point earlier, though, I also observed that as well. I was only there for 2 months, but the same as you shared, the dedication to getting the work done, all of that, I observed that, and love your call out about, dinners and all of that. Cause yeah, I do think that's incredibly important. I think especially I was working on a transformation project, not M&A, but I think it's even more so important for any M&A, the relationship building piece.
Yeah, it's very true, because it does help out with understanding of how people approach problems, as well as understanding that you're really there to represent your interests, and that's really, really great. And you have to. I always compare it, to any sports teams. When you see, people playing against each other, and then at the end of the day, players come in, hug each other, and congratulate each other. I mean, that's very often the case in or I like that about a certain M&A transactions, is like, yeah, you can represent very different interests in different points, but at the end of the day, that's where you really want to kind of put those professional differences aside and still respect each other and be we have a good trusting relationship.
This has been such an awesome episode so far. Lots of deep insights being shared from the world of JVs, but also M&A. Before we wrap up, Ivan, any last thoughts or any sort of tips that you would like to share with people who want to start out a career in JV or M&A in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already touched upon, but I would say 2 things that they have really guided my M&A career. As I mentioned, one thing is if you see something that is not getting done or that is not being addressed, make sure that you find somebody who can address it, that somebody is assigned to it, or that you pick it up and you get it done. I mean, that's something that you really need to, anybody who works on a project or leads an M&A, you got to do that. Otherwise things will fall through the cracks, because you just cannot plan for everything on day one. There's no roadmap that I've ever seen on an M&A transaction that addresses every single point that comes along the way. And the other thing is that when I was I was young and eager and wanted to do a really good job for the company, and I was sitting in my VP's office, and I started about arguing, and I know I was right. I was starting about arguing, and she replied to me like, Ivan, we're trying to close the transaction here. We're not trying to win a paragraph 2A or 2B. It's really okay to let go of this. Our main objective is to get the transaction done and to get the whole document ready and be able to do it. People lose perspective of that. They get hung up on one or two particular points, and they'll ruin their chances of winning another much more bigger point because they want to win every single point. Look at the big picture, know what you're after, know what your objective is, and don't lose sight of that objective. I always say that's professional as well, personally, but especially in M&A. If you're trying to buy a company, if you're trying to sell a company, think about it 2 years down the road. Is anybody going to remember that you got 10% more on paragraph 2A or 2B? Probably not, but everybody will remember, oh crap, you screwed up that deal, didn't you? So that's the perspective that I always like to tell people. Have end goal in mind at all times, and try to understand, is it what I'm trying to argue for? Is it what I'm trying to address going to benefit in achieving that objective?
That's brilliant, Ivan. In fact, you raised another very, very critical point, but we don't have the time to discuss it today, which is personalities. And personalities play a big role in any JV or M&A transaction. So I think that's a great cliffhanger to close our session. So, and now I'm going to pass it down to Marcella to wrap up the session.
Yes, I loved that advice. I mean, it's so great. It's you have to stay focused on your end goal, right? And so if you have to give a little on 2A or whatever, then do so, because ultimately at the end of the day, you want to, close the transaction as the VP had mentioned. I love that advice. I think that's great parting advice. Ivan, we just wanted to also ask, if folks want to get in touch with you, anyone who's listening or watching, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Best way is my email. Always feel free to go there and we'll share it, but it's my last name, Golubic at gamma-mcdg.com. That's an easy way to get in touch, or you can go on the website that we have, is at www.gammacdg.com as well, and we'll be happy to get in touch with you and share our experiences.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We loved this time with you today. We're so grateful for this opportunity. And for anyone listening or watching, if you liked what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, take a listen at the 8 different podcasts. We've got Apple, Spotify, Google, and 5 others as well. So you can find us on all those platforms.
Thank you. It was a pleasure spending this time with you, and hopefully we'll do it soon again.
Yes.
Thanks, Ivan. And till next time, I wish everybody a very happy weekend, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you.